Have you ever looked back at a relationship, whether it was romantic, a friendship, a family connection, or even a workplace dynamic, and wondered, how did someone so manipulative end up choosing me? Maybe you've asked yourself another painful question. Was I too trusting, too forgiving, too nice? If those questions have crossed your mind, I want to begin by saying something that many survivors of narcissistic relationships desperately need to hear. Being kind was never your weakness. Your empathy wasn't the problem. Your generosity wasn't a flaw. The problem is that narcissistic individuals often recognize these beautiful qualities before anyone else does, and instead of appreciating them, they learn how to exploit them. One of the greatest misconceptions about narcissistic relationships is that narcissists seek out weak people. That isn't actually what happens. Many survivors are remarkably intelligent. They're successful, they're compassionate, they're responsible, they're emotionally aware, and they're deeply capable of loving another human being. Those aren't weaknesses, they're strengths. But strengths without healthy boundaries can become vulnerabilities. Today we're going to explore why genuinely kind people are so often drawn into relationships with narcissistic individuals, what psychological mechanisms are at play, and most importantly, how you can protect your empathy without losing the very qualities that make you who you are. Because healing doesn't require becoming cold. It requires becoming discerning. Kindness is not the same as weakness. One of the most damaging messages survivors internalize is this: if I hadn't been so nice, this never would have happened. That belief creates shame, and shame keeps people trapped. Let's separate two very different concepts. Kindness is choosing compassion. Weakness is lacking the ability to protect yourself. Those are not the same thing. A kind person may care deeply about others while still maintaining healthy boundaries. But many people were raised to believe that being good meant always saying yes, always forgiving, always understanding, always sacrificing, always putting themselves last. Those lessons don't create kindness. They create vulnerability to manipulation. Because narcissistic people don't see kindness the way healthy people do. Healthy people see kindness as mutual respect. Narcissistic people often see kindness as access. Access to your time, access to your energy, access to your emotional labor, access to your forgiveness, access to your resources. And once they discover you're willing to keep giving, even when they aren't reciprocating, they begin building a relationship based not on equality but on extraction. Why narcissists scan for certain traits? Think about a skilled salesperson. They don't approach every customer the same way. They observe, they listen, they adapt. Manipulative personalities do something very similar. Consciously or unconsciously, they assess people. Who apologizes first? Who avoids conflict? Who wants everyone to like them? Who struggles to say no? Who feels guilty setting limits? Who keeps giving second chances? These become valuable pieces of information, not because they're signs of weakness, because they're signs that someone may tolerate behavior that healthier people wouldn't. Many survivors tell themselves they changed after the relationship began. Sometimes that's true, but often the narcissistic person was studying you from the very beginning. They noticed what mattered to you, they learned your values, they identified your fears, they watched what made you feel guilty, and over time, those observations became tools for control. The power of empathy. Empathy is one of humanity's greatest strengths. It allows us to comfort people, understand pain, build families, create friendships, support communities. Without empathy, healthy relationships couldn't exist. But empathy has a shadow side. When empathy exists without discernment, it becomes self-sacrifice. Instead of asking, is this person treating me well? You begin asking, why are they hurting? Instead of noticing disrespect, you search for explanations. Instead of protecting yourself, you become committed to fixing someone else. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Healthy empathy asks, I wonder why they're acting this way. Unhealthy empathy says, it's my job to heal them. That single belief has trapped countless people in destructive relationships. The rescue instinct. Many kind people carry what psychologists sometimes call a rescue identity. They feel responsible for making other people feel better. If someone is lonely, they help. If someone is struggling, they stay. If someone has trauma, they understand. If someone apologizes, they forgive. Again, these aren't bad qualities. The problem arises when another person learns they can repeatedly hurt you and still receive unlimited compassion. Narcissistic personalities often tell stories that trigger this rescue instinct. You'll hear about difficult childhoods, past betrayals, cruel ex-partners, family rejection, professional disappointments. Some of these stories may even be true. Trauma can absolutely shape personality, but trauma does not excuse ongoing abuse. Understanding someone's pain should never require accepting mistreatment. Unfortunately, many kind people confuse compassion with obligation. They believe if I love them enough, they'll heal. If I'm patient enough, they'll change. If I don't give up on them, they'll finally appreciate me. Months become years. Years become decades, and the change never comes. Because genuine change requires accountability, not someone else's endless forgiveness. Why hope becomes a trap. Hope is beautiful. Hope helps people survive unimaginable hardship. Hope keeps families together. Hope fuels recovery. Hope inspires growth. But narcissistic relationships distort hope. Every tiny act of kindness feels like evidence that things are finally changing. One good weekend erases 6 terrible months. One heartfelt apology erases repeated betrayal. One romantic gesture makes you question everything you know. The human brain naturally searches for consistency. So when kindness briefly appears, it wants to believe the loving version of the person is the real one. Unfortunately, with narcissistic dynamics, those moments often function as reinforcement. Just enough affection, just enough attention, just enough validation to keep you emotionally invested. This intermittent reinforcement creates one of the strongest psychological bonds humans can experience. It keeps people waiting, trying harder, giving more, believing tomorrow will finally be different. The fear of becoming selfish. One of the greatest obstacles to healing is language. Notice what happens when survivors begin setting boundaries. They often say, I feel selfish, I feel guilty, I feel mean, I feel like I'm abandoning them. That's because many kind people were taught that protecting themselves was somehow morally wrong. But healthy boundaries are not acts of selfishness. They're acts of self-respect. There's an enormous difference between refusing to help someone and refusing to allow someone to repeatedly harm you. Learning that difference changes everything, because kindness without boundaries eventually becomes self-neglect. And self-neglect doesn't create healthier relationships. It creates relationships where one person gives and the other simply takes. By this point, you may be wondering something that many survivors ask themselves after leaving a narcissistic relationship. If I saw the red flags, why didn't I leave sooner? This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of narcissistic abuse. Outsiders often assume that people stay because they are naive, dependent, or incapable of recognizing what is happening. But psychological research and years of clinical experience suggest something very different. People don't stay because they don't see the abuse. They stay because the abuse is mixed with hope. And hope is incredibly powerful. A narcissistic relationship rarely begins with criticism, neglect, or emotional manipulation. It begins with what feels like extraordinary connection. That beginning is what makes the ending so confusing. The illusion of being finally understood. Many survivors describe meeting the narcissistic person as feeling almost magical. They'll say things like, I've never met anyone who understands me this deeply. It felt like we had known each other forever. They seemed to like everything I liked. They made me feel special in a way no one ever had. At first glance, this appears to be compatibility, but compatibility and imitation are not the same thing. One of the reasons narcissistic individuals can seem so captivating in the early stages of a relationship is because they often become exceptional observers. They study you. They pay attention to your dreams, your fears, your values, your interests, your insecurities. They notice what makes you smile. They notice what makes you cry. They learn which compliments affect you the most. This isn't always a conscious strategy, but it often results in what psychologists refer to as mirroring. Mirroring creates the illusion that you found someone who is remarkably similar to you. The conversations feel effortless, the chemistry feels intense, the connection feels rare. For someone who has spent years feeling unseen or misunderstood, this experience can be profoundly validating. The problem is that mirroring creates intimacy faster than genuine trust can develop. Healthy relationships unfold gradually. Trust is earned, respect is demonstrated consistently over time. Narcissistic dynamics often accelerate emotional closeness before true character has had the chance to reveal itself. Why love bombing feels so convincing? The term love bombing has become widely recognized, but it's often misunderstood. People imagine grand romantic gestures, expensive gifts, or constant compliments. While those behaviors can certainly be part of it, love bombing is really about something much deeper. It's about creating emotional dependency. Imagine receiving constant messages, endless attention, daily praise, promises about the future, statements like you're unlike anyone I've ever met, we're soulmates, I've never felt this way before, you're everything I've been searching for. To someone who has experienced loneliness, rejection, or inconsistent affection in the past, these words can feel incredibly healing. Your nervous system begins associating this person with safety, excitement, and emotional fulfillment. Dopamine increases, oxytocin strengthens emotional bonding. The relationship starts feeling not just enjoyable, but necessary. Then, almost without warning, everything changes. The compliments become criticism. The attention becomes distance. The warmth becomes unpredictability. At this point, many survivors don't leave. Instead, they try to get back to the beginning. They believe the loving version of the person is still there somewhere. They assume they must have done something wrong. This is one of the most heartbreaking misunderstandings in narcissistic relationships. The goal shifts from enjoying the relationship to recovering the relationship that existed only in the beginning. Why kind people blame themselves? Empathetic people tend to look inward first. When conflict arises, they ask, did I misunderstand? Could I have communicated better? Was I too sensitive? Am I expecting too much? This willingness to self-reflect is actually a healthy quality. But in a narcissistic relationship, self-reflection becomes self-blame. Instead of examining the other person's behavior, you begin examining yourself endlessly. You replay conversations, you analyze text messages, you question your memory, you wonder whether you're imagining things. Over time, your confidence begins to erode. This isn't because you've become irrational, it's because you've been exposed to repeated psychological inconsistency. When someone's words and actions constantly contradict each other, your brain works overtime trying to make sense of the contradiction. Eventually, many survivors conclude the only explanation is that I must be the problem. That conclusion is precisely what keeps the cycle going. Gaslighting. When reality begins to feel unstable, one of the most damaging tactics used in emotionally manipulative relationships is gaslighting. Gaslighting isn't simply lying. It's the repeated attempt to make another person question their own perception of reality. You remember a conversation clearly. They insist it never happened. You express hurt. They accuse you of being dramatic. You notice disrespect. They tell you you're imagining things. Gradually, certainty becomes confusion. You stop trusting your own judgment. You begin relying on the other person to define reality for you. For kind people, this process is especially painful because they genuinely want to be fair. They don't want to accuse someone unfairly. They don't want to overreact. That admirable desire for fairness is repeatedly used against them. Instead of asking whether the other person's behavior is healthy, they become consumed with proving that they themselves are being reasonable. The cycle of idealization, devaluation, and intermittent reward. Healthy relationships certainly have disagreements, but the overall emotional climate remains relatively stable. Respect remains intact, trust remains intact, care remains intact. Narcissistic relationships tend to follow a much different pattern. First comes idealization. You are admired, praised, elevated, placed on a pedestal. Then comes devaluation. The same qualities that were once celebrated suddenly become criticized. Your kindness becomes neediness. Your confidence becomes arrogance. Your sensitivity becomes weakness. Nothing you do feels good enough anymore. Then, just when you're emotionally exhausted, something unexpected happens. The warmth returns. A thoughtful message, a meaningful apology, a romantic gesture, a brief return to the person you fell in love with. This unpredictable cycle is incredibly powerful because the human brain becomes highly motivated by uncertainty. When rewards become inconsistent, people often work even harder to receive them. It's similar to why gambling can become addictive. You never know when the next reward is coming, so you keep investing. Not because the rewards are frequent, but because they're unpredictable. Many survivors spend years chasing moments that become increasingly rare. Why trauma bonds feel like love. One of the greatest myths about toxic relationships is that leaving should be easy once someone realizes they're being mistreated. But emotional attachment doesn't disappear simply because awareness increases. Trauma bonds form when periods of fear, confusion, and emotional pain are repeatedly interrupted by moments of relief, affection, or hope. The nervous system begins associating relief with the very person creating the distress. This creates an incredibly confusing emotional experience. You don't simply miss the person, you miss the relief they occasionally provide. This is why survivors often describe feeling emotionally addicted, not because the relationship was healthy, but because the emotional highs and lows became neurologically intertwined. Breaking a trauma bond isn't simply about walking away. It's about allowing your nervous system enough time and consistency to remember what genuine emotional safety actually feels like. The hidden cost of constant forgiveness. Forgiveness is often celebrated